There are several references in the Book of Mormon to a location called the head of the River Sidon. What is the head of a river? Where is it in the Book of Mormon? Why is it important? Well, it turns out that the head of the River Sidon is a key location in the Book of Mormon, and it's important to determine what it means and in order to be able to determine Book of Mormon geography. So it's actually an important question. In this video, I'm going to take a look at what a head of a river is and what it might have meant in the Book of Mormon. First, we're going to look at the head of the River Sidon and its occurrences in the Book of Mormon. So I'll take a look at the 4 locations in the Book of Mormon that refer to the head of the River Sidon, and we'll see what we can discern from those 4 references. The first one is in Alma chapter 2, verse 27. And in that verse, this is where Mormon is giving a description of the geography. And he says in the highlighted parts, so he talks about how the land, there was a narrow strip of land that divided the land of Zarahemla by a narrow strip of wilderness, which ran through the borders of Manti by the head of the River Sidon, running from the east towards the west, and thus were the Lamanites and the Nephites divided. So here, what we learn about the head of the River Sidon is that it's along the dividing line, or what divided the land of Zarahemla from the land south, the land of Nephi. We also learned that it's near the land of Manti. Now here it says running from the east towards the west, but I don't think that it means that the river was running from the east towards the west. Instead, I think that what the author is doing is sort of directing visually, virtually, the mind of the reader kind of from the east towards the west. But it is a possibility as to whether this is trying to describe the flow of the river or whether it's just directing the reader. But anyway, so what we learn about, the first thing we learn about the head of the River Sidon, the head of the river, is that it's along that dividing line between the land of Zarahemla and the land of the Lamanites, and it's also in that wilderness and near Manti. All right, the second time we hit the description of the head of the River Sidon is in Alma chapter 43, verse 22. And it's talking about the people, they departed, they took their journey, it says, roundabout in the wilderness, away by the head of the River Sidon, that they might come into the land of Manti and take possession of the land. And so this is talking about the Lamanite army movements. What we learn about the head of the River Sidon here is, again, it's in the wilderness area and apparently near the land of Manti. So that fits the first reference to it. The third reference is in Alma chapter 50, verse 11. And this is the time where Captain Moroni is fortifying and building the fortifications. And he said that it says that in verse 11, he was fortifying the line between the Nephites and the Lamanites, between the land of Zarahemla and the land of Nephi. From the West Sea running by the head of the River Sidon, the Nephites possessing all the land northward. So again, it places this head of the River Sidon sort of in this dividing area between the land of Zarahemla towards the north, where the Nephites were, and the land of Nephi on the south, where the Lamanites were. And then the last reference in the Book of Mormon is in Alma 56, verse 25. And if you take a look at the verses 24 and 25 here, the highlighted portions is talking about the Lamanite army. This is with the armies of Helaman. Talked about how the Lamanite armies did not want to go by the armies of Helaman with their army, lest they were not sufficiently strong and they should fall. So it talks about the Lamanites' army being afraid to be exposed to the armies of Helaman. And then it also says in verse 25, neither durst they march down against the city of Zarahemla, neither durst they cross the head of Sidon over to the city of Nephi. So this description of the head of the River Sidon describes it more like a river or small river or stream or something that you could cross. And so that is the fourth reference to the head of the River Sidon. Now let's take a look at what the head of a river means, because there is some dispute about what the head of a river means. If you look at the definitions for head, and this is the Merriam-Webster website. If you'll go down, it's not, obviously it's not one of the main definitions, but you see that their definition for a head is, as a head of a river, the source of a stream or river. So here the word head, the head of the river, means its source. Another, and there are many examples that you could use for this. So this is dictionary.com, their example for definitions for the word head. Again, it's not the main definition, but down here, the source of a river or stream. So they both agree that the head means that the source of the river or stream. Now, in addition to just having head separately, there is a word riverhead. So something can be referred to as a riverhead. If you look at Merriam-Webster again, a riverhead is the same thing, the source of a river. So it's just the head of a river. Another definition for it would be a riverhead. Another example of a definition of a riverhead is the Collins Dictionary. Again, riverhead, meaning the source or spring of a river. Now, what you'll see in the definitions is the source of a river. It can be a spring, or there are other potential sources of a river, which could include small streams that combine, multiple small streams that combine, or it could be like a glacier. So there are other possibilities for the source of a river. Spring is one possibility, but those are all definitions for riverhead. Same thing, related word headwater is another way to refer to the head of a river. Here, if you look up headwater definition, this one here is from the just a Google search for headwaters, and what you see is it can be a tributary stream of a river close to or forming part of its source. So here you're looking at maybe a stream or an early upstream part of the river that's a tributary and helps form the river. The same thing, another definition. This one is headwaters, meaning streams that flow into a larger river and kind of where the river starts. So those are all the dictionary type definitions for a river, a head of a river, riverhead, headwaters for a river. They all kind of mean the same thing, and they all point to the sources of the river, where the river comes from. And it can be a spring, or it can be a tributary or small streams or whatever that form the larger river. Now, how is the word used in the Book of Mormon and in the scriptures, though? So let's take a look at that. In the Book of Mormon, there is one use of the head of a river, and that's in Lehi's dream. So if you go to 1 Nephi chapter 8, and this is in Lehi's dream. So Lehi has a dream. He sees the tree, he sees the river, and he says, and this is verses 13 through 17. So he beholds the river. He says, I beheld a river of water. And he says, and I looked to behold from whence it came, and I saw the head thereof a little way off, and at the head, and he sees his family there. So here, the use of the head is referred to, or indicates that it's the place where the river comes from. So he looks to the place where the river came from whence it came, and then he sees the head of the river, he sees the family, and then he looks towards the head of the river again to look for Laman and Lemuel. So this use of the head with relation to a river seems to fit the dictionary definitions pointing to the head of the river, meaning the source or from where the river comes from. So at the very least, it's looking upstream of the river to where the river comes from. There is, however, another use of head related to river in the scriptures, and this is in Genesis. So this is actually in Genesis chapter 2, and this is starts in verse 10. This is a description related to Eden. And don't get hung up on this description with the names of the rivers. As we know, Joseph Smith had different revelations about where the Garden of Eden was later. But what we have here, nevertheless, is the use by Moses or those after him describing the river, a river related to the Garden of Eden. And they use the word head, which gives a different definition or a different use of the word head with regard to a river. So this starts in Genesis chapter 2, verse 10. It says, "A river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from thence it was parted and became into four heads." So it talks about a river and then that breaks into four heads. And it says the name of the first is Pison, or Pison. The name of the second is Gihon. The name of the third river is Hiddekel, and the fourth river is Euphrates. Okay, now what this does then is it indicates that the four heads of this river are four smaller rivers, which could be branches or tributaries of the river. The way it's described here, it kind of indicates them as branches, but the way that the language has been traditionally interpreted is actually going upstream, with the four heads being four tributaries flowing into and towards the Garden of Eden. I'll just pull up an example of an idea. This is sort of a Christian Jewish kind of imagining where's the Garden of Eden. They thought it's in the Mesopotamian area because of the mention of the Euphrates, and what they think is there's like four rivers that are tributaries that combine, and that they think maybe that was what was meant as the Garden of Eden. For our purposes, the key point though is that the word head, or the heads of a river, can mean smaller rivers. So it can indicate that another definition of a head of a river, it could mean a branch or tributaries of a river. Now, I still think that in the Book of Mormon, especially because of the way it was used in First Nephi by Lehi, he talks about from whence the river came. He looks to the head thereof. It's very clear that they think of and use the head of a river to refer to where the river comes from. But I do think it's important to point out that the head of a river could also be considered a river, a smaller river. A head of a river can be a smaller river, whether it's a tributary or a branch of a river, as used in Genesis. So what this does, it means that when we are trying to determine where was the head of the River Sidon, and those uses of the head of the River Sidon in the Book of Mormon, again, kind of put it as sort of the dividing area between the land of Zarahemla and the land of Nephi. There was that one scripture that talked about where Helaman was talking about the armies dared not cross the head of the River Sidon, or the head of Sidon. What that fits then is this idea of the head of the river actually being a small river or stream or something, or a part of the river, and not just a single point, like a single spring or something that starts the river. So it gives that possibility of a different understanding of the head of a river. Now, one last thing I had here is I asked, so if you ask Google, so how do you identify the head of a river? And typically, traditionally, the way you identify the head of a river or the headwaters of a river is it would be the furthest upstream point, before it gets into a larger body of water. Or here it says here, the headwater is the furthest point on each of its tributaries upstream. So if you're looking towards the head of a river, traditionally, the idea is you'd be looking upstream towards one of these smaller tributaries, the smaller streams or rivers, as the source of the larger river you're looking at. Okay. So why does it matter? Again, the reason it matters is because people disagree as to what the head of the River Sidon means. And the head of the River Sidon ends up being important for determining the geography of the Book of Mormon. So that's why I decided to take a step back and say, well, what does the head of the River Sidon really mean? And in doing that, I see that it opens up the possibility of the head of the River Sidon not just being potentially a single point, a single spot, but instead potentially being a river or a stream or a tributary. So it could be a different way of looking at what the head of the River Sidon is. And so it gives additional possibilities in looking at geography. Now in the future, I'll do some more videos looking at the geography of the Book of Mormon, which I'll share. All right, so that's the video for today. If you are interested in the material, please like and subscribe. Please also comment below with your thoughts. I look forward to seeing them and interacting with you. Thanks.